The 1970s, a violent, unpredictable time in Northern Ireland's history. It was a decade of doorstep assassinations, failed political initiatives, and the death of the three-piece blues band and the values of the 60s. Musically, it began with taste and ended with a complete lack of it. This was rebellion with a capital R, and its name was punk.
Tell me the whole story, kid.
A lot of English bands wouldn't come near Northern Ireland, really. So you felt like the real poor cousin anyway. And a lot of the kind of local bands were like Jim Armstrong and Light and things that were like left over from the 60s. And it was these guys with big beards that, you know, played terrible sort of Jimi Hendrix songs that went on for 20 minutes kind of thing. And I was, you know, me and a generation of people couldn't relate to it at all. You just felt like there was nothing to do. And then kind of punk rock kind of went off, and it was just the most amazing feeling, you know, just to be, you know, in your teens when all of a sudden it was like 20, 30, 40 bands, kind of people that you knew at school almost, that were on stage in youth clubs and, you know, putting out records, and, you know, from the doldrums to becoming one of the most famous parts of the UK in terms of music. It was a fantastic feeling. It was really great.
At the end of the 1970s, just about the time the punk thing was happening, you know, collectively around Britain and Europe and Ireland and the States, Belfast was in a really tragic state of affairs, and it took the likes of kids who were into rock music to really break through the very dangerous barriers that were around the city at the time, not physical as well as political and cultural barriers, and it was just fascinating to see that happening.
Why would Derry or why would Belfast be bigger for a new youth music than Dublin, say? It was. I don't know why. I wouldn't have thought that at all. That would go against my theory of, you know, I mean, like, what, people kept quoting, what was it, 50% of the population in Dublin are under the age of 25, because every young person from all around the country is coming to live in Dublin and all this sort of thing. I don't know if that still holds, but I would have thought Dublin would have been much bigger. It didn't seem to be. Belfast did seem to have something. Having said that, I'm damn sure if I lived in the middle of it, I would have realised there wasn't that much of a scene in Belfast, really. It wasn't as big as it seemed from outside. Because there were plenty of bands. It wasn't just, you know, Stiff Little Fingers and the Undertones. There was millions of bands.
People in Belfast, and still do, stay in their own areas. If you're born in one particular area, you go out there at night. There's no reason for you to go outside your own area. Punk was something very new. And I still don't know why it actually touched a nerve, but for that period of time, it did. And people all of a sudden went into town and crossed into areas where they hadn't been before, got to know people. There was never any chance of them meeting before. There's a great feeling of a camaraderie, you know. It was like us against the world, and Belfast is just the place for that there, that feeling that it's us against everybody else out there, and that it touched the nerve with the youth then.
In England, it was very much it was a grassroots thing, and then the media got hold of it, and the record companies came in, and even by the end of 1978, it was dead in England. But when it reached Northern Ireland, there was no media, no record industry to ruin it. People over here were punks because it meant something to them. It gave them a meaning, and as opposed to what else was going on at the time, it was special. It was ours.
In the 70s, when the punk era started, Northern Ireland, like England, suffered a lot of the same sort of social deprivation, if you like, you know, unemployment, whatever, but only on a much higher scale. We had the added burden of the Troubles, and that gave kids a way to express their anger and frustrations in a more positive manner, you know. So I think, you know, Belfast was ripe when punk came along.
Just as the blues had discovered its own venues, so it was with punk. In keeping with the music, they were small, intense, and what they lacked in glamour, they made up for in atmosphere. They didn't come looking for the punk bands, the bands went looking for them. They transformed them from backstreet bars into the shrines of a new and disaffected generation.
When we started off, there were no venues. There were all these older bands that played covers, and we couldn't play covers. Musically, we weren't up to it. We didn't want to either. When we said we liked the New York Dolls, there was only one song on their first album that we could play, and that was Pills. It was a Bo Diddley song. So that's why we started writing our own stuff. We couldn't get venues anywhere because they wouldn't book us. They wanted bands playing cover versions. We wanted no time for that. We went out and hired hotels, the Glenmachan Hotel, Garton Lodge Hotel, hired them for parties, printed our own tickets, brought our mates along, and by that way we built up venues, we built up an audience.
if you want to be in a group, then you want to play all your favourite songs. There was no original material. Almost everywhere else had a proper, God, what the word you look for? Like, it was easy. There was gigs for original bands to play. We weren't like that. We were going out playing our own material. There was no backup. People used to actually come up to you and say, "Look, do you not play real songs? I don't know any of this here. I want to hear top 20 hits." Or even if you were a punk band, do you sing the Sex Pistols? Do you sing the Damned? They didn't really understand. In Northern Ireland, we were original bands doing our own material.
It was very difficult to get a gig playing original material. I think that was the crux of the problem. At the time, we effectively took sort of the Northern Irish sensibility of cover versions and became sort of like a K-tail. I think someone described it as a K-tail punk band at the time, which wasn't too far off the mark. You know, we basically played sort of the entire first Clash album and a few Damned songs and things like that, and started writing our own material through that.
No bands before the Undertones wrote their own songs, or at least most of their set consisted of their own songs. Punk made it easier. You just needed to know 2 or 3 chords, and that was it. Possibly, you know, people felt, well, we need to write songs to make a living out of this, and punk seemed an easy thing to do.
Certain venues in Belfast became synonymous with punk. There was the Pound, and perhaps the best known, the Harp Bar.
When we started playing the Harp, it was a strip club. There were no clubs left. We couldn't play anywhere, and a strip club let us play. And we built the Harp from absolutely nothing to it became a mecca nearly for sort of a lot of English bands too to come over and play. People still talk about the Harp Bar. It's part of a lot of people of my generation's memories. It's where they met their wives, maybe. I mean, it's something my generation certainly will always look back to those days.
After nearly a decade of violence, Belfast became a natural home for punk music and the values that went along with it. It was the music of the wasteland, laden with cynicism and empty of hope. So it was little wonder that the English bands of the time flocked to the Belfast venues, not to play necessarily, but to establish their street credentials in a city widely accepted as the most dangerous in Europe.
Whatever it was about the punk scene in Belfast, it certainly captured the imagination of a fair portion of the international media, and the British media in particular, and European as well. And it then became like de rigueur for any punk band, any big UK punk band, to do something in relation to Belfast. I remember the Clash arriving one morning and going down and having their pictures taken outside the Harp, you know, and they were frightened. And it was in the middle of the day in Belfast, and they just had to get their pictures taken. And the pictures subsequently appeared in NME, you know, guys posing threateningly or menacingly in front of all this barbed wire, you know. And I remember being there and they said, "Wow, look, there's a tank."
The success of punk in Northern Ireland was as dramatic as anywhere in the UK. While bands like the Sex Pistols, the Clash and the Buzzcocks were the big names across the water, Belfast had an energy of its own. Some of the bands were destined for national success. Others should have made it, but didn't. One of them was Rudy, the first act to be signed by a new Belfast-based record label, Good Vibrations. It was started by Terry Hooley, who wanted to tap the ferocity of what he'd seen at venues like the Pound.
So I went down that night to the Pound with a couple of old hippie friends, and we hadn't been out to a gig in years, and went down, and here was these 2 bands. The first band were called the Outcasts. I didn't like them too much at all, but the second band, Rudy, they were fantastic. It just reminded me of all my youth and all the garage bands that I particularly loved, like the Seeds, the Standells, the Electric Prunes, and the excitement of it. It just reminded me of my youth. And the police came in to check out the gig, and all the kids started shouting, "SS, RUC, SS." So the police went away and they came in with the UDR. Next thing I remember is they wanted to stop the gig, and I couldn't understand this. And I think one of the kids jumped up and lifted a fluorescent tube light and threw it at them, and it sort of went dark, and there was all this scuffle, and the whole gig was broke up. I thought, this is for me.
She's 90. She's 90.
Good Vibrations, the shop and the label became the nerve centre of the Northern Ireland music scene. Like the bands it signed, Good Vibes was a reaction to everything that had gone before. It wasn't run like a record company, more like a community centre where the only membership requirement was to be a punk. Things in the music business had never been done this way before. There were few contracts, no business aims, just pure, hard-edged excitement, and it was unique to Belfast.
But I wasn't really aware of the punk explosion in England. I wasn't even interested in that. I thought, here is something that I can identify with in Belfast. This is my hometown. Let's make a record, let's document. And then I thought, let's put Northern Ireland back on the music map.
So hard to beat. Every time she walks down the street, another girl in the neighborhood. Wish she was mine, she looks so good. I wanna hold her tight. Get teenage kicks right through the night.
At the start, with the Good Vibrations, it wasn't all that big a, we call it big a break. Like we were glad we had a record out and all that sort of thing, but you know, we thought if it sold 400 or 500, we'd be doing right. And then the guys from Sire Records heard it, and they took it in a big way, and then offered us the contract.
So what does that mean? How will it change things for you? We had money now.
Well, with more money.
And we were comparing Teenage Kicks to Buzzcocks by Earl Scratch or something, you know. For us, we didn't think we were ever as good as the Buzzcocks anyway, you know, in terms of being that original or whatever. But, you know, the actual song, Teenage Kicks, wasn't even our favourite song on the EP. You know, True Confessions was. So, you know, whenever that John Peel played it twice, it was as much a shot to us as anything there, you know.
I wanna hold her tight. Get teenage kicks right through the night.
They'd come on the phone. They used to put Billy the drummer on the phone because they thought he spoke the better English, you know. And they'd come on, they'd get terribly excited, and I do quite a good Derry accent, but I won't do it for you now because it would be humiliating. But and they used to come on and they'd shout at me and get very excited. And they just sounded like good people, you know. And they sent me some demo tapes, which I've still got, and haven't bootlegged yet, but it's an old age pension, you know. And when the record came out, when you sent us the record, it was just like as good as anything I'd ever heard in my life, you know. And I still now, however many years later, I still tell people when they ask me, you know, what is your favourite record of all time? That's still it. And when I did Desert Island Discs, I picked it as the one record that I would take, you know, if I was only allowed one record.
The thing was, once the Undertones happened and they got a deal, it lifted everybody's expectation of who's going to be next. And, you know, all of a sudden, this idea of getting a record deal was really, you know, it was quite possible to do that. Whereas before, it was kind of like something you never heard of, like Dana, Joseph Locke, Phil Coulter. I mean, that's the generation that had deals before that. So the bands would come along, and then there would be kind of the Moondogs, because the Undertones were very good to us. They used to give us a lot of support gigs. In fact, they let us tour Ireland with them and tour England. And that really ultimately helped us secure a record deal.
Until Good Vibrations came along, nobody believed that you could do it from here. And so consequently, they never really tried. If there was a good band here, they inevitably went over to England before doing anything else to try and make it on the club circuit there and hopefully get a record contract there. When Good Vibrations established itself here, you didn't have to go anywhere. You could make a record here, you could do plenty of gigs here and have a great time. It's only if you really wanted to sort of hit the big time, as it were, that you might be enticed by a record company from London, but it wasn't essential, and that was the big difference. And I think really it hadn't happened before because nobody had ever tried.
It was really the success of the Undertones and Stiff Little Fingers inspired a lot of people to take it up. Just once anything takes off, obviously it gives people that boost of confidence and to think if they can do it, why can't we?
Stiff Little Fingers weren't a part of Good Vibrations. The architect of their success was Gordon Ogilvie, a Daily Express reporter who'd been in Belfast covering the Troubles. Suspect Device, like many of their other songs, addressed politics and violence head-on. It was something few other bands of the time had the interest or the inclination to do. Politics was almost a dirty word to many of their contemporaries, and Stiff Little Fingers found themselves under attack as a result, not least from the Undertones, who'd become by this time Good Vibrations' most successful export.
The situation in Belfast and in Northern Ireland in general had reached a stage where it was being ignored almost by the British media, you know. I mean, what had been sort of, you know, man killed in Belfast when it was front page news in 1 month, sort of 2 months later, it had to be 3 or 4 men killed before it became front page news, or else it was buried on page 7 or a little paragraph down beside the weather, you know. And that sort of thing was very important to us to try and get across when we first, particularly when we first moved to England to play. It was like sort of, you know, like people are being killed over there and you don't seem to care, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, we were political in that sense, certainly.
We've always said that all you can write about, if you're going to be truthful, is what's happening around you. And of course you could write, oh, it's lovely bowling down the boulevards of LA on my motorbike. We're starting that in LA and I can't drive a bike. But it made sense, and that it wasn't, people say, oh, you sensationalised the thing, but we just didn't ignore it. People are going to say that, oh, you did this, and the whole Ulster situation. The first album has 13 tracks on it, of which I think 5 are to deal with that. But we used to, the Undertones used to get at us in the paper and say, oh, you sensationalise this, that and the other. But we used to say the same thing. Where are you from? You know, this is going on, and you can't just say, oh, everything's great, and, you know, my perfect cousin plays Sabudio. Maybe he does, but he has to be careful where he plays it.
Don't believe them, don't believe them. Don't be bitten twice. You gotta suspect device. Don't believe them, don't believe them. I'll tell you question everything you saw.
The difference between the first Stiff Little Fingers LP and the Undertones, that spoke for itself anyway. So, you know, occasionally we did get asked about why don't you sing about the Troubles, and, you know, but like people could more or less see that we were trying to be a pop band as opposed to, you know, a kind of a political punk band sort of thing, you know.
The Undertones in particular took the opposite view, that sort of, you know, folk in Northern Ireland had enough of the Troubles, and they felt that they were sort of would have been ramming it down their throats if they'd written songs about it, which is fair enough. I mean, you know, there's room for escapism as well. It's just, it's never really been my shtick, you know. I mean, basically, if you've got a problem, I'd rather sort of face up to it and try and solve it rather than stick my head in the sand and ignore it, you know.
Yeah, we used to slag them off all the time, you know. It doesn't end the day now, you know. If a record's good, you know, after a while, then that speaks for itself, you know. You know, I actually really believe that the Sex Pistols were what they said they were until, you know, you read the John Savage book and how contrived it all was in the first place. But, you know, the records still sound great, and interviews at the time were great. You know, it's sort of pop culture anyway, you know. So, like, I hear Suspect Device, and it still sounds a good record, you know, despite, well, the Stiff Little Fingers were a heavy metal band or not. Their later records proved them to be, you know, not that great a band. But like, I really don't care anymore.
And I think without Stiff Little Fingers, bands like Rudy, Protex probably would have had an easier ride as well, because all of a sudden people were trying to get this kind of rock against sectarianism thing going, and, you know, rock against sectarianism was a lot of people getting drunk and jumping around in the Harp Bar. It was nothing to do with stupid, you know, I'm a suspect device, I'm going to blow up in your face. You know, that was just nonsense. And, you know, it was just tabloid songwriting. It was shameful, really.
There was a lot of people who were interested in the political stance. I mean, when The Wild Colonial Boy was released, it got great, you know, reviews, whatever. But basically this was all down to the political aspect of the song. When we released the follow-up in the Traps, it was in no way political, you know. And people were very sort of disappointed. You shouldn't be writing about this. This is the sort of stuff you should be doing. But that was our way of trying to make people understand, and more facets to the band than just, you know, our politics. You know, this is another facet of the band. And I feel if I had released another political song as a follow-up single, it would have done a lot better than the one we actually did release. Not because it would have been a better song, just simply because of the lyrical content, the controversy, whatever you want to call it.
I'm not entirely convinced that bands actually wanted to get onto the political bandwagon. I think they were rejecting a number of things, and the essence of punk was to reject. They rejected the music industry that had existed. They rejected their school and their parents, the way that bands have been doing since the early 50s. They rejected things that they were told. And I also think that they rejected the political situation.
The press and stuff like that, people who give you write-ups and stuff, they asked you a wee bit about your songs and then what part of Northern Ireland were you from? Do you live near the Troubles and stuff like that? Do you know anybody who died in the Troubles? We were asked that and stuff like that. But we answered the questions as best we could, but I thought they were missing the point. Like, we were over here and we had a handful of songs, and I didn't mention a gun, I didn't mention a bullet or anything. It was all about love and stuff, and nobody wanted to know.
Singing directly about the Troubles, everyone over here felt it was probably a bit corny. It was too easy to do. I mean, obviously the Troubles influenced your music, and that lyrically, certainly the songs wouldn't have been the same if they'd been written anywhere else in Belfast. But having said that, nobody wanted to dwell on them, and the worst thing was people didn't want to exploit them.
The people who joined groups, for the most part, did so almost as an alternative to what was going on here, that they didn't want to sing about it. They wanted to create an atmosphere and a scene that got them away from that sort of thing. All the people in the Harp Bar, I never related to them on the level of what part of Belfast they came from or what religion they were. The thing that you stressed at all times was what you had in common, which was the music.
So hard to beat. Every time she walks down the street, another girl in the neighborhood. I wish she was mine, she looks so good. I wanna hold her tight. Get teenage kicks right through the night. I'm gonna call her on the telephone, have her over 'cause I'm all alone. I need excitement, though I needed a fight, and it's the best I've ever had. I wanna hold her tight, get teenage kicks right through the night. Alright, a teenage dream so hard to beat it. Every time she walks down the street, another girl